Welcome to the first in a series of lectures on human physiology. It is the second in sensory physiology, but it's the first of the special senses. And you were provided with a lecture slide set that is the 10B. You will see that I've split this into three presentations here, taking each special sense separately. I think that will be a bit easier to manage. So we begin first then with olfaction, of course, the sense of smell. And we start by reminding ourselves of chemoreception in general, the smell and taste. So the B-1 will be olfaction, the sense of smell, and B-2 will be the sense of taste. They do have things in common, so we'll just progress from one to the other, as I said, with two separate presentations, but we'll reflect on common features as we proceed. So olfaction is one of the oldest senses. Taste is a combination of 5 basic sensations, and we'll use taste transduction to exemplify both cases. There is under olfaction, there is a link between smell, memory, and emotion. And in certain organisms, and there's some evidence that even in humans, there is an accessory olfactory structure that has potent links to behavioral triggering circuitry. This structure is called the vomeronasal organ, or the VNO for short. It is well established that it exists anatomically and functionally in rodents, and it of course, plays a powerful role in organisms' responses to pheromones. Dogs also have a vomeronasal organ, so if you have a dog, especially one that is a sniffer, such as we have a basset hound, and he loves to pick things up in his mouth and just kind of mouth them. I think he ends up even eating them, but anyway, it's pretty disgusting. But otherwise, there's smells that he's picking up from the turds or whatever it is he's eating. I usually just let him go and try to prevent it if I can. But anyway, what they're doing when they're mouthing it is they're getting the vapors out of the the stuff and sending it to their vomeronasal organ to lock it into memory, as well as picking up obviously all the other chemical sensations, a weird behavior. But anyway, they do it. It's normal for them, and he can't understand when I try to stop him from doing it. So the olfactory cells then in the olfactory epithelium are what we're going to focus on. We spent enough time talking about the vomeronasal organ. There's some demonstrable impacts of odorants on human behavior, and we're going to leave it at that. You can look into the literature if you have additional interest on that. Olfactory epithelium in the nasal cavity. Well, just to go back quickly, you might be aware of some survey research in humans that females that typically room together in college, typically will synchronize their menstrual cycles, and it's thought that this is part of what's going on. Odorants bind to the odorant receptors in either case, the pheromone to the receptor, or the odorant to the odorant receptors in the nasal olfactory epithelial cells. Not the olfactory epithelial cells, but the olfactory neurons. The G protein coupled cyclic AMP linked membrane receptors are what are involved. So they are metabotropic types of receptors for the chemosensory systems. So the olfactory system, we take a quick look at the anatomy. Remember, I redrew that other picture so that it would go straight from the uppermost portion of the nasal cavity straight into the olfactory bulbs, and then the olfactory tract would be the CNS component. A bundle of axons in the CNS is a tract. So where these fibers, the central processes of these bipolar neurons in this special visceral efferent pathway, not efferent, hopefully you got that, special visceral afferent, special because it's a special sense, visceral because the odorants must dissolve in the aqueous medium and the mucus of the nasal cavity in order to become hydrated properly to bind to the receptors in the peripheral process or the dendrites of the olfactory neurons. Then the central process passes through the bone. It's called the cribriform plate, if you want to know or remember that. And then, of course, the synapse between the first order sensory neuron and the second order sensory neuron is in the olfactory bulb, and the tract carries those fibers of the second order sensory neurons centrally. So there's additional cells that are supportive to the neuron dendritic processes. So collectively it's called the olfactory epithelium, contains a portion of the olfactory neurons and as well the supportive cells and mucus secreting cells and glandular cells nearby as well. So this collections, although they're split up into these bundles going through separate little holes in the cribriform plate, these collective set of bundles of central processes of the olfactory neurons going into the olfactory bulb are the first cranial nerve, the olfactory nerve. So here we see the organization of that. So they're not showing all the other supportive cells. In the anatomy course, you'd look at all the detail of the olfactory epithelium, and here we're just seeing the neurons put into place, the first order sensory neurons. They are bipolar, as you can see, and their peripheral process is really a dendrite. It also has telodendria. Actually, there's little parts that stick out into the mucus up here that have little dilations on the end of them, or bulbs, bulbous-like dilations, and that's where the actual membrane receptors are located. And of course, when you get a depolarization, it passes across the cell body and is, of course, converted through integration into a coded signal through the olfactory nerve, collectively, all of them, the central process of these bipolar neurons, special visceral afferent system, to synapse on these large multipolar neurons, the second order sensory neurons in the olfactory bulb. And then these send their axons centrally, as we said, as the secondary sensory fibers through the olfactory tract into the target sites of the third order sensory neurons, and we'll build on that circuit as we go. Well, here they go. I'd forgotten. They do show this higher magnification of the supportive cells, and you can see these telodendria on the peripheral process of these sensory neurons. They are actually bipolar neurons. You can see the oligos pick them up almost immediately upon passing into the underlying connective tissue here. And protect them as they pass through the bone. You notice it's not showing each one as myelinated, and I believe these are unmyelinated, but we won't hold ourselves to anything on that. So they're showing mitosis here for some of the supportive or sustentacular cells, is another name for it. And these sustentacular cells do have a turnover rate, as do any epithelial cells. And these neurons actually are capable of regeneration as well. Not when their central processes are transected. It's possible to have a physical trauma, and they talk about it in the textbook, that just severs the entire olfactory nerve or destroys this epithelium. But there are some reserve cells nearby that can differentiate into new primary sensory neurons and reestablish the circuitry. In lower organisms, it's much more dynamic than in humans. Here you see a developing olfactory cell as an indicator of what we just described. So there is a mucus layer, and the olfactory cells in the olfactory epithelium live only about 2 months, and they are replaced by new cells whose axons must find their way to the olfactory bulb. So there's equally, I guess, turnover of the olfactory neurons. The mucus layer is where the odorant molecules dissolve, and then the olfactory cilia, I called it telodendria, but it's just to keep that picture in your mind, but they are actually referred to as cilia that contain the odorant receptors. There are the supportive or sustentacular cells. They sustain the neurons nearby. The olfactory cell is a sensory neuron. The developing one we saw here, the basal cell layer, includes stem cells that replace the olfactory receptor cells, as well as those that replace the epithelial cells, the sustentacular cells. Then there's the underlying connective tissue, which is always called the lamina propria for mucous membranes. Then the olfactory receptor cell axons, cranial nerve 1, collectively carry information to the olfactory bulb. And from the olfactory bulb, we see the olfactory tract that passes back to that basal forebrain, right near the septal area, actually just ventral to the nucleus accumbens. So olfaction is very closely associated with the reward circuitry in the ventral forebrain here. And this olfactory cortex is where we would find the third order sensory neuron, be the primary olfactory cortex, and it has direct links right to the limbic system, as I'd indicated with the statement about the nucleus accumbens that is right there. Also pathways that can come right over here into the amygdala that you remember is in the temporal lobe. That would be right there. You see the temporal lobe, right? And so you know the hippocampus is down in this part and the amygdala sits right in front of it, not on this lateral surface but on the medial surface. Well, in the medial lobe it is subcortical, so not on the surface, forgive me. But the ventral surface of the frontal cortex, actually prefrontal because it's so far forward, is where we find that primary olfactory cortex, and it has direct connections right into the surrounding cortical areas, the cingulate gyrus, straight to the hippocampus, and as we said, straight over to the temporal lobe through some other pathways just beneath the diencephalon. So that completes our discussion of the olfactory system.